Good morning. Thanks for singing with us, and there's a lot to sing about Christmas season. And if you're a guest with us, or maybe you're recent and aren't familiar with who we all are, my name is Dan. I'm honored to serve as pastor here and to deliver the weekly main message. We do so right out of the Bible, and I want to warn you that the Bible says that when you read it, it functions like a mirror, and it reflects back to you truth, and the truth challenges, right? And the truth convicts. And it also functions like a two-edged sword. So when we get in, so here's your disclaimer warning today. We're going to get into the scripture text, and the truth of God's word is likely to function today like a mirror and a two-edged sword that's going to bring challenge and conviction to us. Is everybody okay? Okay. Okay. Glad to hear it. So we've got, we're going to dig into the third message of our series, a really insightful, hard-hitting message. Title of the message is Christmas, It's All Good, written by Andy Stanley. So much helpful messaging. First two messages, and today we're on our third one. And it, if you pay attention, you may have noticed, and I think this has probably started to surface because of what we can see on social media. But there is kind of a trend or a pattern, and again, maybe it's not new, but maybe we're now noticing it more than ever. And that is stories that are emerging on social media of people describing their deconversions. People who are saying, "I was a Christian, but now no longer," right? Do you know what I'm referring to? These deconversion stories where people say for one reason or another, they're reporting that they belong to God, they were in the church family, they grew up a Christian, whatever. Recently, one of the more famous public figures who told their deconversion story and actually wrote a book was a pastor, and the pastor said that I found myself in a dilemma. Here I was pastoring people who belonged to the church family and belonged to God, but I was slowly but surely forfeiting, giving up on, and abandoning my faith. And he said one of the things he was really concerned about was that he was going to have to eventually tell his mom. And he said, it went fine. I did not have the reaction I thought I was going to have from my mom, but more shockingly, a few months later, my mom surfaced her own deconversion story, and one of the things that she said publicly was, "I was so relieved to finally come to this conclusion to deconvert because," this is what she said, "I don't have to hate anymore. I don't have to hate anymore." I mean, most of you gave the reaction I gave. You're kind of like, what is that? Why don't you have to hate anymore? And you know, if you get into a conversation with maybe a 20-something or a 30-something who is kind of talking among their coworkers, classmates, and their friends and their family and their peers especially, they'll tell you that this is not an uncommon statement, that they believe that if you were to be a part of the Christian church, you'd have to be comfortable hating people. And they might often say, so many of my peers who grew up in the church have kind of deconverted. And we've done this before, but I'd love an update. How many of you know somebody who you would consider, or they might explain their journey spiritually in the Christian life as deconversion? Do you know any? Would you raise your hand if you know someone who might say, I'm deconverted. I'm all done. And when you hear things like, I deconverted, so now I don't have to hate anymore, it makes me think, and even this is even kind of what you get when you have a conversation with somebody who maybe is in their 20s or early 30s. They kind of say this, that I recognize that if I had grown up in one of those kinds of churches that they're telling me about, I don't think I would still be going to church either. And I think it's worth mentioning, right, that some of the people who are deconverting have serious philosophical, theological, heart-wrenching questions about the faith, which I believe God is up for dealing with those questions. But then there's another kind of deconversion, which kind of seems like it's more connected to the kinds of churches, the kinds of people, or the kinds of Christians. And I wonder what kind of Christian life or what kind of Christian church leaves you or leads you to where you're just looking to get out. What kind of Christian church and Christian faith leads you to despise outsiders and build walls and gather up stones to throw? What kind of church is that? What kind of Christian faith is that? Now, we all agree, right? That's not good news. It's not a good news people and a good news church and a good news faith. That's a bad news faith. And that's delivered by bad news people. And for some people, the resistance to the Christian faith is this. Is it really true? How do we know it's true? I think there's some conflicting stories about its truthfulness and whether it's archaeologically or whether it's the transcription of the Holy Scriptures. Maybe those are the reasons some of you might think. But don't we know this, that the other question that's surfacing too is this, and this is kind of a popular question to ask about the Christian faith. Is it even good? Is a Christian faith even good? Now, we know this, that if the news we get is sounds good, we want it to be true, right? If the doctor says, hey, we have an initial look at the tests, and the initial look at the tests is that you're free and clear of that disease, right? Wouldn't you say you want that to be true? You lean in and you say, I'm going to hold on to that. I'm going to tweet that. I'm going to Instagram that. I'm going to Facebook that. I'm going to start text blasting that. I really hope that's true. I'm going to get it out there like it is. When we believe something to be true, we certainly hope it's true. And then eventually you get to the question, is it good? Or is the Christian faith somehow bad for the world, bad for the nations, bad for the people, bad for me, bad for my family? Or you might have heard it described this way: is the Christian faith dangerous or harmful? Isn't it toxic that all the religions in the world have fueled all of the wars and all of the heartache in the world? And for somebody who's in a Christian faith who says, my Christian faith was forcing me to pretend to be someone I'm not, that's troubling. That's a troubling position. And obviously, if someone feels like their faith is bad news, they want it to be false. If somebody believes that your faith is bad news, they probably are slow. They're resisting it. They don't really want it to be true. Now, what about the news that's not good? If the news is not good, when you hear news that's not good about your health, when you hear news that's not good about science, when you hear news that's not good about the Cowboys not making the playoffs again, when you hear that news, you're like, I don't want that to be true. I'm going to kind of hold off on that. I'm going to kind of slow it down, slow the roll down. Not good means that we hope it isn't true. We don't lean into it, we lean away from it. So imagine, if people believe the Christian faith is good news, you can picture them. Luke actually writes this, that in the ancient world where Jesus existed, when the word got out that this good news message of Jesus was surfacing, they wanted it to be true so much. There's a phrase he uses, he said they were eager to get in. Actually, he says in one version, it's put this way: they forced their way in. They just said, this is so good. I want to hear what it's about. I want to be a part of it. I want to experience this. But when good news sounds more like bad news, then most of us believe and hope that it's not true. We expect that it isn't true. So when we hear good news, we hope it is true. When we hear bad news, we hope it's not true. We resist it. We don't want to accept it. But when Jesus' birth was announced, when it was announced that Jesus was arriving on the planet, it was described as good news. And this good news was going to bring great joy. And it wasn't going to be for some of the people some of the time. It was going to be for all the people all the time. It was good news of great joy for every single kind of person. Seriously, every person. Every man, woman, and child, every class, every race, every tribe, every tongue, every nation, every single human being on the planet was going to receive this good news, and it was going to bring them great joy, and it didn't matter who they were. In fact, how did God kind of start? By announcing it to shepherds. You imagine the shepherds being like, whoa, this is got me all nerved up that you're telling me this, because you may not know, whoever you are, angel, we're not the power people, right? We're probably not who you wanted to get this message out through. We're just at the bottom. Have you smelled us? You don't smell so good. So this news was so good, they just decided to call it the gospel, which means the good story. This Jesus' story was a good story, and they decided, let's call it what it is. It's a good story. It's the good news of the gospel. It's literally why you and I say the word gospel, because that's how they described this news. So why then is there so much resistance? If the original version was called a good story, the good news, why is there so much resistance? Why aren't the people that we know and love rushing in, leaning in? Why aren't they eager to get in? Why aren't they forcing their way into the good news? Of course, I'm making the connection that it's possible that they're not sure it's good news. It's quite possible they feel like the good news is actually bad news. Why is there so much resistance? Why would people be looking for an out, trying to escape or slip out or deconvert or go public with their doubts? Wouldn't everybody hope it's true? The original version was so compelling that it was worth telling, and Luke documents it, and he says, many people did this. I did this so that you knew that what you believed was true, that you could be certain of what you believe. But why aren't people eager to get in? Why aren't your neighbors, your family, your spouse, your kids, your parents, your co-workers, classmates, and teammates, why aren't they eager to get in? I remember when I went to school in Tulsa, and, being from the Northeast my whole life, when you're a person of faith, you're not necessarily outspoken about it, right? When you're a person of faith in the Northeast, you realize, well, there's all different kinds of people who are people of faith, and, there's all kinds of reasons why you don't want to come off like you're just beating people over the head with your faith, or in order for them to believe that you care about them, they've got to convert to your quote-unquote religion and so on. But when I got down south, I was shocked to discover people are wide open about their faith, and it seemed like those who didn't have faith were the ones that were living in the shadows. I remember being at a restaurant, and as I walked through the restaurant, we were being seated. I was probably 18 years old, just newly arrived in Tulsa. I was in the Bible Belt. And as I'm kind of weaving through the restaurant, everywhere I looked, there was some kind of Bible study. The Bibles were open on all these tables. I'm like, where am I? Where do you think I was? Chick-fil-A. No, I'm just kidding. I wasn't there. And, and I remember we were joking that it's going to take us a while to be that open about our faith in a restaurant. So we started practicing by dropping our napkin and then praying while we bent over to pick it up. Dear God, thank you for our food. Amen. That was our first little training session. But people were wide open. I'm not sure if I would say that in the Bible people who aren't a part of the Christian faith are eager to get in, but I know something has happened between the original version and our version. Something has happened. And I want to ask you this question here today and just pause to think about this. What happened to the good news of great joy for all people in such a way that everybody was eager to get in? What happened? Why is there now some kind of trending hashtag of deconversion? And I probably would, if we had a conversation, you and I were having coffee, I would probably say, isn't there probably a lot of reasons? There probably is. We could probably talk about a whole set of reasons why people no longer think it's good news, or worse yet, somehow believe that the Christian faith is actually bad news. And there's a lot of bad news versions. But the Scripture helps us see in some way, shape, or form. You ready for this surgery part? You ready for this challenge part? You ready for this? The truth confronts us and challenges us. What if it's as simple as this? We happened. What if it's so simple that the message is good news, but now we've got a bunch of messengers like me and you, us, together, who over time have distorted the good news, and in some people's view have represented not good news, but bad news. I hope you're open to exploring this with me. I hope you're open to kind of investigating, are we a part of the reason why people aren't eager to get into the good news, or even might feel like it's bad news? I mean, after all, we have in so many ways, you learn this more and more, I think, over time and getting to kind of be exposed to global Christianity. We've Americanized the good news. We've certainly politicized the good news. What about this? We have, in our Western civilization, we have prosperitized the good news, right? We have anti-intellectualized the good news in some cases. We have privatized the good news. In other words, the good news is mostly for me. It's for my own private world. And in some ways, we've reduced it to just something that you just have to believe. I remember when I was young and I first started to find Christianity appealing, I was kind of growing up in the phase where those end times creepy creep movies were coming out. Do you remember Thief in the Night? Do you remember that? And so, to be honest, I'm pretty sure I jumped in the good news because of fire insurance. I did not want to be left behind, especially if there was a thief coming in the night. I was out. I talked to so many youth group peers of mine who grew up during that phase, and we recall, I didn't have any that I remember, but we recall having nightmares over the possibility that Jesus returns and whisks away your family and you're stranded by yourself, left behind because the thief came because Jesus whisked them away like a thief in the night. So there's all kinds of reasons why some of us may have believed, but when it gets reduced to what our faith can do for me, no matter what the impact is on other people, or in spite of how it'll affect you, we have kind of become a part of the crisis. Let me say that again. When it gets reduced to what the Christian faith can do for me, regardless of its effect on anyone else, we have to really look closely as to whether it's possible that that's not really the good news of great joy for all people. And it certainly the question has to be asked, is that good news of great joy for all tribes and all nations and all political persuasions? That wouldn't be the original news. That's something that we would call the customized news. What does the customized news mean? It means you get to pick and choose what parts of the Christian faith that you want to highlight, you want to own, you want to embrace. The only parts that really serve my interest. The pick and choose, customized news instead of the good news. We could describe this as customer Christianity. What is customer Christianity? That is that the Christian faith presents a menu of options, and when we look at that options, we pick the ones we like. We kind of add to our lives the parts of the Bible that we're willing to accept, the ones that we're willing to believe, the ones we're going to obediently follow. But then there's some other parts of the Bible that we're like, well, I want some extra of that. I want some extra rules. Or maybe we say, I want some extra judgment. I'm really good at that. That's how I grew up. I'm really kind of naturally flow. Or you might inadvertently embrace, adding a little extra condemnation that wasn't really in the original good news. Or we might say, I want to hold some of that. I want to kind of keep that off my plate. I don't really want to embrace the loving my enemies part, right? Customized good news. Or customer Christianity, where I see the Christian faith as some parts that I pick and choose. It might be easier to grasp this concept if you remember what Burger King did to us back then. You remember this whole thing? I love this because I loved having it my way. I don't want mustard on my burger. Ew. Ew. Mouse turd? Ew. So I loved when Burger King started to say, hey, you're going to pull up to our restaurant, you're going to get in our drive-thru line, and here's what you get to do. You get to tell us what you want on your sandwich. That's kind of fun. Just ketchup, just onion. Don't look at me like that. I mean, it's so judgmental. It's so judgmental. I said, I don't want mayo on it. Miracle Whip, maybe. No, I'm just kidding. Here's what Burger King was telling us. You're the customer. You deserve to have it your way. You get to pick and choose from our menu. And when we do this in our Christian faith, we basically do the same thing. We believe that we can expect that God is going to be sure that we can order it our way, and you will like it because you are having it your way. That's why you're going to like the Christian faith, because you get to have it your way. I mean, I hear this all the time when it relates to, I kind of believe a little bit about the Christian faith, but I don't really care for the way the Christian faith says this, that, or the other thing about my personal life, and I reject that part, right? I accept parts of it, but not all of it. And the moment we do that with our Christian faith, it's no longer good for everybody. It's just good for us. And it's just good for people who are like us. Now, here's an extreme example of picking and choosing. Did you know there was such a thing as a slave Bible? This is a real thing. It was published in 1807, and there was a society that had gathered together to help slaves convert to Christianity. I just learned this recently. This is a little bit surprising. And this Society for the Conversion of Slaves wrote a Bible, but they were very careful in the Bible to teach slaves not only how to read the Bible and how to introduce them to the Christian faith, but also they spent time diligently removing in the translation any references to slavery being condemned or bad, or any slavery at all in the Bible. And anything that undermined the legitimacy of slavery, this Society for the Conversion of the Slaves removed it from their translation. And they got into the hands of slaves probably 1,000 less pages of the Bible. So that they, in fact, some of you are familiar with the Exodus stories, right? What did God do for his people who were slaves? What did he do? He set them free, right? Imagine you're reading the Bible and there's no Exodus, no freedom for the captives in the nation of Israel. Also, they got rid of this. I mean, it's stunning. Listen to this. They got rid of this verse in Galatians. There is no longer Jew or Gentile or slave or free. There's no longer male or female, for you're all one in Christ. Gone. Erased out of the Bible. Because it didn't fit their version. They were having it their way. It was customized Christianity. It was good news for slave owners, bad news for the slaves. I mean, if your version or my version of the Christian faith isn't good news for everyone, our boss, our coworkers, for Jews and Gentiles, for every single class and race, every single tribe and tongue, the rich and the poor, good news for the saint and the sinner. If our good news isn't good news for the righteous and the unrighteous, the in-laws, the uncle, the cousin, the rebellious child in your own home or life, in your own family, if our good news isn't good news for a skeptical spouse or your ex-husband, your ex-wife, or your intolerable neighbor, or the inadequate employee that is in the service industry serving you, if your good news isn't good for all of them, you know it's very likely that your news isn't the original version. Because the original version was good for every one of those categories of people. Paul, in this verse, he says, you've never met anyone. There is no one you will meet who the good news wasn't written for, aimed at, and could be life-changing. The question is, more importantly, what about me? What about me? Am I good news? Well, let's ask this collectively. Are we good news? Or even more personally, are you good news? You remember what Jesus said should characterize his disciples? By the way, he also said they're going to know who you are by your love for each other, but he also said there's a way to categorize his disciples. He said, my disciples are going to be like light in the dark. They're going to be out among the world, and they're going to salt the earth. They're going to bring flavor to the earth. You're going to come across my followers, and you're going to be like, oh, that's different. That's some good flavor. I like what that adds to the world. And he also said, but you're also going to shine. You're going to be bright. Did he say that we're going to be known for our correct belief? No. Is that important? Of course that's important, but that's not what he said we would be known for. By this, all men will know that you are my follower, by the way you treat and the way you love one another. The way you treat each other, the way you love one another. That's the good news. Every generation of Jesus followers like you and I, every generation of disciples is responsible for making sure we continue to pass along this idea that you and I are the good news, that we are lights, that we are treating people well, that we are loving and caring for everyone, and to ensure that this news gets passed on, this news continues on. Jesus could not have been clearer. You, meaning you personally, if you're following Jesus, if you're a disciple of Jesus, all of his followers, you and me and all of us together. You are the light of the world. Let your good deeds do what? Shine out for all to see, for everybody to notice that you have some shiny living. You have some shiny attitudes. You have some shiny behavior. You have some shining words. You have some shining outlook on the way that the world is going. And this shininess helps people see. It helps people visualize. The good things that you're doing are help people connecting who you are, your good deeds, with a good Father who has sent good news that brings great joy to all the people. Right? And we are to personify, to embody the good news. Not just hand someone a book and say, hey, read this. This is a gospel. This will be important. Not just to do that, but instead to own and personify, to make this come to light. Initially, you remember the Apostle Paul, initially he thought this was all bad news, right? His whole identity was wrapped up in the old system. His whole identity was wrapped up in excelling and exceeding everyone else in the old system, right? He was a master at the law. He was an expert at religion. He had the right lineage. He was in the top class in his particular tribe. And he saw this as threatening. The good news came and it was a threat to him. Everything about his identity was tied to the old ways. So he eventually kind of is empowered as a deputy, and he goes out as an activist. And what's his main goal? To stomp out, get rid of this sect called the Way of Jesus. And he's out there trying to eradicate it, trying to stomp it down and get rid of it, protesting, put it out of business. And then he runs directly into the teeth of the good news in the form of Jesus, who confronts him and says, Saul, why are you persecuting me? I'm going to add something here, you ninny. You cotton-headed ninny muggins. Why are you doing this? I'm sure it was a lot more severe than that. He runs into the teeth of the grace and the mercy of God. By the way, what is it that leads us to repentance? The Bible, Scripture teaches this. It's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. His grace and His mercy that makes people say, I surrender, I repent. And he runs right into the teeth of the good news of Jesus expressing to him grace and mercy. And when he understands what the good news, Paul doesn't just, Saul at the time, but then eventually Saul, he doesn't just lean in, he forces his way into the good news. Now, he's still an advocate, right? He's still an activist. He still kind of spends his whole life on this cause, but now this cause is to advance the good news. Now this cause is for him to personify the good news. And he understands what real good news is. He lays his life down to confront and reject violence, coercion, and fear, and to get rid of it. He continues to be an activist, but now he's got a completely different message. And he says this message of the good news works its way out through you as love. That's what it looks like when God's at work. So he gives his life to clarify the good news. He gives his life now to help people see just how good the good news is. And he writes a letter to the Christians living in Philippi. And in this letter, he really challenges them. And I want you to think about something. I'm about to read this verse, and I just want you to think about this. What if all the Christians in all the world just embraced it? What if all the Christians in all the world lived it? What if this is what characterized every Christian in the world, every Christian that everyone in the world comes across? What if our lives personified the good news? This is what the Apostle Paul teaches to the church at Philippi. He says, is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Is there any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? In other words, he says, if anything good comes from belonging to Jesus, when you receive the good news and you start to hope in the good news and it brings you great joy, if there's any benefits that come from this good news and following Jesus, then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and one purpose. In other words, the overflowing goodness of Jesus starts to overflow out of all his disciples. And the good news that has come your way is designed to overflow to all the people who are in your life. Everyone who's asking this question, and I think this is a very common question. I'm assuming a lot of us have asked this question. When I look at how dark the world is, how chaotic it is, how hurtful it is, how confusing it all is, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to act? How am I supposed to function here? Well, number one, we learn here in the scriptures that we're to resist getting our marching orders from people who aren't Jesus, right? TV personalities, authors. We don't get our marching orders from commentators that we're watching or following on TV or in our social media. So let me refer you to one of the volumes of specific behaviors that is described in the scripture for those who are following Jesus on how disciples of Jesus should behave in a world of wickedness, right? Everybody knows how to behave in a world that we like, the world that is full of happiness or full of people who are just like us, but how do we act in a world that's dark? Jesus's overflowing goodness isn't for you alone. It's also spilling over into other people. Here's what Paul says. Well, let's start with this. Don't be selfish. Now, this is probably where you started if you raised children, right? Immediately, they learned a word. What's the word that your child learned first? Maybe, probably. My kids, you need to know, my kids all learned the word dad first. I just want to put that out there. They didn't. They learned another word, probably similar to you. They learned no, right? Anybody teach your kids that word? Did anybody catch a sibling or a spouse or a parent saying, let's rehearse this, little one. Your first word's going to be no. No one teaches that. You don't have to. Why? Because it's natural. It's normal, right? Is it rebellion? I think it's rebellion. No. You're going to tell me what to do. You're my authority, and I say, no, I am not doing it. And we start with this. No is rebellion. It's selfish, right? You have to learn to share. You have to learn to participate in humanity, cooperate with the world, right? So we start, now, wouldn't you love, if you just think about this, don't be selfish, don't try to impress others. By the way, I wonder sometimes, does this mean there's no such thing as a Christian influencer? I'm just asking. So, wouldn't you like to be married to somebody who lives this? Don't be selfish. I mean, wouldn't you like to work for somebody like that? Wouldn't you like to live near somebody like that or hire somebody like that if you're an employer? Aren't you glad if you know people like this? Aren't you glad your mom or your dad or your grandparents or your boss was selfless? Aren't you glad? They bring something to the world. Also, he goes on to say this, be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. I mean, this is a lot to chew on, I think. These are simple words, and for some of you, this is kind of like, I've heard this all for so many different ways, so many different times. This is what I'm praying. I'm praying that somehow, uniquely today, the Holy Spirit comes alive in you, and these truths take root. And you just say, be humble. Be humble. Think of others. Not just before yourself, but also as above yourself. Imagine if all the Christians in all the world all embrace this level of humility where we say, when I'm thinking about somebody else, I'm actually going to think of them as better than me. I'm going to elevate them. And this is what it would cause. Why do we do that? Well, it's about looking out not only for your own interest, but taking interest in other people. I don't have to illustrate this, but most of us probably know someone, work with someone, live with somebody who is only interested in their own self, right? And when you're talking, you could tell it irritates them as they're waiting for you to just take a breath so they can jump in and say, oh yeah. I mean, I've been marveling at this for a long time, and none of you in here do this, so I'll comment on it. But on Facebook, you'll see somebody might say something like, just diagnosed with cancer, and we're really struggling here, pray for my family. And then there's like a dozen comments. We had cancer too, it was terminal, it was terrible. Our whole family died. You're like, whoa, that's a strange reaction. And in other words, I don't think this is intended, but it feels like, you think your cancer's bad, ours was way worse. And I always imagine the conversation going like that. In other words, there just seems like it's so instinctive, it's so natural for normal people who aren't belonging to Jesus to look out for their own interests instead of taking an interest in others and asking questions. And we all need work at this, right? We all need the Holy Spirit to help us do this. But what would it look like? What do followers do? How do we do this? This flows from a very distinct attitude. This type of behavior comes not naturally, right? This isn't what we learn naturally. This isn't what comes out of our heart naturally. This is what Jesus does, and this is what Jesus helps us do. In Philippians, Paul goes on. He says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset. Think about this. Have the same attitude that Jesus did. So if we're following Jesus, we begin to look like Jesus. If we're following Jesus, we begin to talk like Jesus. We begin to act like Jesus. We prioritize what Jesus prioritized in your relationships with one another. We basically get to do what Jesus did in all of our relationships. In our marriages, in our parenting, in our friendships. If you're a boss, in your bossing, you get to have the same attitude and the same mindset as Jesus. If you're a manager, it's in your managing. If you're dating somebody, you're married to somebody, it's in your relationship. What did Jesus do? He washed the feet of the very person who would betray him. I mean, that's fascinating. You think about when Jesus washed his feet. Sometimes I think, oh, this must have been fun. It was like a going away party with Jesus. He gets to wash everybody's feet, and everybody's kind of like, oh, this is really humbling. And Jesus, don't do this. I mean, you're super important. You're our rabbi. You shouldn't be washing our feet. And it's not, I always imagine, it's maybe not necessarily a celebration or even something that calls for any conversation, because Jesus knows that in that group of people that he's washing their feet is someone very, very important to this gospel story of the cross. Who is it? It's Judas. And sometimes I just wonder, if I were Jesus, what do I say when I get down to Judas? Just clean your own stinky feet that smells like your heart. You betrayer. He washes his feet. And Paul says that attitude, that mindset, if you follow Jesus, if you're a disciple, there are people who have crossed you, stabbed you in the back, that have taken things from you that you value. And one of the ways that we make this good news come alive, we personify the good news, is that we approach those kinds of people the same way Jesus did. We wash their feet. We replicate the same attitude about other people in relationships. You know what Jesus did? Jesus didn't power up. What did he do? He powered down. Jesus didn't get over people and lord it over them. Instead, he lowered himself underneath. Though he was God, the supreme creator of the universe, he did not think equality with God was something to cling to. He lowered himself. Why did he do that? To elevate the needs of other people. And you and I needed to be rescued and healed, so he lowers himself. He laid down his rights and privileges. By the way, be cautious of Christian leaders who are telling you you ought to stand up and take hold and fight for your rights and privileges. I would be very cautious about that message coming from Christian leaders. Be careful. If we have the same mindset as Jesus and the same attitude as Jesus, you remember Pontius Pilate says, so they say you're saying that you're the king. Who are you? That's what they're saying. Jesus fight for his rights and his responsibilities as a citizen of wherever, Rome, a citizen of Israel. Instead, he laid his rights and privileges down. He didn't think, by the way, another funny thought, at a moment's notice, Jesus could have raised up his human fingers and just supremely just flicked any one of those people off the planet into oblivion. Gone. Right? He lowers himself. The people who were accusing him were guilty, accusing the innocent one. And Jesus doesn't fight everyone who threatened to diminish him. He leveraged his power, he leveraged his influence, and he did it to help those who were getting crushed, those who were separated from the system, those who were being certainly oppressed by the powerful and the influential, people who had less. They were marginalized and minimized. And world leaders, if world leaders who were Christians, church leaders who were Christians, if the nations of the world, if their Christians came together and they did what Jesus did and they consolidated their power to help those who are being crushed, we would see a lot more good news expanding around the whole world. I mean, some of you know this. Your parents did that for your family, right? They give up their rights and privileges in order to love you, in order to empower you, in order to give you the strength that you need to become a contributing part of your family. And those things are good for the whole family. Instead, what did Jesus do? He gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. He humbled himself in obedience to God, and he died a criminal's death on the cross. I mean, the purpose of a death on the cross, by the way, crucifixion, is annihilation. It is to put into oblivion whoever this person was, right? They've already been, the criminal who is being crucified has already been rejected by their family. They've already been kind of, let's say, shamefully disowned by loved ones. And the crucifixion was to erase your existence, erase your memory from the planet. And he was the king who came to flip the order of things and bring all those who were supposed to be kind of squeezed into oblivion, to flip it upside down and to advance an upside-down kingdom. And Jesus led that, starting with saving people who were suffering from their own sin. So imagine if everybody followed that king, if we had kings and politicians and church leaders and business leaders that were literally doing that the way that Jesus did. Now, if we go down to verse 12, he goes on to say, work hard to show the results of your salvation, right? Work hard to show the results. Be working, be conscientious, and put an effort in to show that your salvation has results. For God is working in you, giving you the desire. Where does the desire to do these things come from? It comes from God who's at work in you, and the power to do what pleases him. God says, hey, I want you to do this, and then he gives you the power to do it, and then when you do it, it pleases him, brings glory to him. So when God is working in you, he's working through you. Listen to this. When we personify the original gospel, good things happen around us, not to us. In our version of the Christian faith, when we personify the gospel, we're expecting good things to happen to us. But in the original version, when we personify the good news, good things start happening around us in the places that God has put us. It's the original gospel. And it's the distorted gospel that says, when I put this into practice, my circumstances are going to improve, people are going to think better of me, and my life is going to go better. So he goes on to say, do everything without complaining and arguing, so that no one can criticize you. One of the words that's used in one translation is so you're blameless. So when people want to point out you're the problem, when people want to say, you didn't do it right, you're the one. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone says, oh, they're perfect, but it gives you a chance to say, I own this, right? I apologize. So you can't be blamed. You already know I'm failing and I'm flawed. Now, we who are disciples of Jesus, how do we function in our dark world? What happens? We are converted to be the news, and when we learn to be the news, something happens. Check this out. He says, live clean, innocent lives as children of God, then shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. So here's the answer to the question. What do Christians do? How are we supposed to function? Who are we supposed to be? In our dark and confused and crooked and perverse world, there are people who belong to Jesus, and these people are going to shine like bright lights. By the way, Jesus says, let your light shine. My disciples are salty, and my disciples are bright. Then, when you do that, you will shine among them like stars in the sky. By the way, do you know, this is simple science, perhaps. Isn't it true? I should start this way. I should always start this way. Isn't it true that the stars are the brightest when the night is the darkest and clear, right? The clearer and darker the night, the brighter the bright. So, when we're looking at our world and we're like, this is so dark, it's so wicked, it's so crooked, which is true, right? The darker the dark gets, the brighter the bright is. It's opportunity for people who belong to Jesus to be the news and shine bright, so brightly that Paul says they become like stars in the sky. They inspire awe. Your selflessness will stand in contrast to the selfishness of people who don't belong to Jesus. How does good news behave? What positions us to be the good news? It's following Jesus. So, 4 things really quick. Here's some practical things that'll help us start right now, start today on being the good news. How about this? Apologize immediately. Some of you might have something here that is in our natural being called an ego. And your ego is always talking to you, right? Or let me put it another way. If you have pride, you might say, I'm not sure if I do. If you're a human being, you have the pride of life, and the pride of life is saying, don't you dare apologize. Don't you dare admit you're wrong. Don't you dare start giving in that somehow you're the person who needs to apologize. That's natural and normal when you belong to Jesus and you have the same attitude as Christ Jesus. You start to find yourself apologizing, not just eventually, but imagine how you would change your personal life or your marriage or your family life or your work life if you were the first one to say, I want to apologize for that. I mean, my ego's telling me to stretch it out, to dig in, even though you got the cookie crumbs on your face, you're not admitting to getting into the cookies and just stretch it right out. But the Spirit of God is saying, make it an immediate apology. Let's own it. You might be the only person in someone's life. You might be the only person in your own family. You might be the only person in your workplace who's apologizing immediately. The only one. And by the way, you know what employers want? They don't want perfect employees. They want people who own their mistakes. Right? If you're a parent, you don't want perfect kids. You want kids who own their mistakes. If you're married to somebody, your spouse doesn't want a perfect spouse. Maybe they do. Your spouse probably just wants someone to own it and own it quick and diffuse it. That's good news. That's shining a bright light. Number 2, forgive quickly. Forgive quickly. What does this mean? This means that you and I are going to work pretty quick to make sure that we're digging up the seeds in our heart that if left there long enough would start to generate the roots of bitterness. That means we're regularly sifting our hearts and saying, hey, if there's any seeds there of unforgiveness, I'm going to get rid of it. I got to get it out of there because I know. And by the way, for those of us who still believe, we're wrong to believe that our unforgiveness is punishing someone else. It's not punishing someone else. They're having the time of their life. They're living their dreams, aren't they? And we're unforgiving. We're punishing them, but of course, eventually we discover we're not punishing them. It's our own heart has grown sour. Your anger and your bitterness towards someone else hurts you, not them. So we work to resist it. Unforgiveness. Or we frequently dig up the seeds of bitterness before they take root. How do we do that? We forgive quickly. And how are we going to forgive quickly, by the way? It's important to recognize we're forgiving quickly by remembering how much God has forgiven us. That's where we get the power, right? That's where we get the ability to do that. We focus on God's forgiveness towards us. How much He's forgiven us, how often, how it's ongoing, 70 times 7. So, thirdly, defer. Make a habit of deferring. Make a habit of yielding. Make a habit of elevating someone else, choosing someone else, preferring someone else. You're doing what God did for you. I was recently had the opportunity to be at what's called a cultural intelligence workshop. And the intention of the workshop was to help people in the workplace learn the value and the uniqueness that everybody brings to the workplace. And it was helping us to recognize and value other cultures. And one of the questions that was posed to our group at the time, mostly pastors, one of the questions was, in the prodigal son story, why did the prodigal child end up in the pig's pen? And the whole room said it was because he squandered his wealth. Remember that part? Remember the part where it was like, he's in the, He's in the pig's pen, and everybody in the group said squander his wealth. And then we learned that there was another group of pastors in another part of the world, and they all had the same answer, but it was a different answer. They all said it was because of the famine in the land. And then the instructor told us that then there was a third group of pastors in another part of the world who said all the same answer. They said it was because no one was there to help them. And we were like, wait a second, I see what's going on here. And the instructor helped us to understand that everybody in the same culture answered the same way. Who do you think answered the question? I'll tell you who answered the question. All the Western pastors said it was because he squandered his wealth. And all of the countries that were in the arid desert region said it was because of the famine. Because if you're wealthy and a famine comes, you lose your wealth. Then all of the pastors that were from the highly social, communal African countries said the only reason that the son ended up in the pig pen is because no one actually helped them. And by the way, all three of those reasons are in the text. They're all three in the story. But they were answered differently based on your culture, based on what you have valued in your culture. And when we learn to defer habitually, what we're saying is, my way isn't the best way, my way is a different way. My thinking, my approach, my view isn't the only way, it's one of many ways. My way is second, not always first. And then lastly, give sacrificially. You want to shine brightly, be a person who's apologizing immediately, forgiving quickly, who's deferring habitually, and also giving sacrificially. Giving in ways that remind people of God. For God so loved the world. What did he do? He thought, oh, I feel good. No. For God so loved the world, he thought, I am going to express my love, and he expressed it by giving. He gave his son. When we do this, we make the good news good. We help personify the good news. We become a part of the original messaging of the original gospel. So, question, are you good news? Shouldn't there be something about me that's good news to all people, everyone in my life, no matter what part of the world they're from, no matter what part of the family they're from? If the life and teaching of Jesus doesn't strike our family, our friends, our coworkers, classmates, and teammates as good news, it might be because we haven't been good news for them. Jesus helps us to do it. The angel reassured them, don't be afraid, I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people, and we are a part of that good news. We get to be the good news, and we draw on the person and work of Jesus to do that. And if there's any good news in the world, we can help personify it and be a part of it. Let's pray together. Father, today we are grateful for the Savior, the Messiah, the Lord who came to deliver us from all the bad news, all the destruction, corruption, and darkness, and all the hopelessness. The one who came to set us free from separation from you, the one who substituted our death and our crushing for his own, and the one who lived our life that we were supposed to live, and he did it in our place. And today, God, I pray that by your Spirit, you be at work in our hearts and help us, God, in the areas that we resist being the good news, in areas that we resist personifying it, in areas that we resist being challenged and convicted. We pray that your Spirit would be at work. We would sense you working, challenging, changing, convicting, and that we would grow into people of good news. When people saw us coming, they would say, I'm so relieved they're here. They're bringing something new, something good, something joyful, and their light is shining bright. And we know that you can cause that to happen deep in our hearts. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.